On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, burning questions for San Jose, Seattle, and St. Louis, including which season is more likely for Seattle this year, the playoff season or the non?
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome in to the Locked On NHL podcast, your daily NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On NHL, we continue our burning question series with San Jose, Seattle, and St. Louis. We'll be taking a look at teams all over the spectrum with the Sharks, the Kraken, and Blues. 2 out of 3 playoff hopefuls ain't bad. But for San Jose, it comes down to what do we do? My name is Seth, Toupal, host of Locked On Wilds, one half of your Western Conference Tuesday dynamic duo, joined by JD Young of Locked On Sharks. And JD, we get to your squad today. And so much like I did when it was the Minnesota Wild's turn, I'll hand the microphone off to you and let you dive in to what is going to be the burning question for San Jose this year.
Right. I think for the Sharks, it's how do you turn around a franchise that is literally on the bottom? Like, you were trying to raise the Titanic right now. I've used this reference a lot on my own show. This is a team that was historically bad last year, minus 150 goal differential. One of the worst teams that we have seen in the modern NHL. Easily the worst goals against, give up the most goals per game. Second worst offense, only behind with the Blackhawks behind them. It's a team that was bad. They tanked, right? And they were rewarded for their tank with a shiny new toy named Macklin Celebrini. But how does this franchise, which has been bad basically since their Western Conference run against the Blues, how do you start to kind of turn the page on what happened last year, right? And so that way you don't become one of those. You don't want to be the next Sabres where you're just constantly rebuilding, right? You want to have a path forward. And I think that is the big question for the Sharks. And they went out and they were very active, I think, in adding veteran pieces, adding leadership. Tyler Toffoli, who they signed right as free agency started. He's wearing an A already for the team. Been paired with Macklin Celebrini on a line. You claim Barclay Goodrow, which there's some shenanigans right there, but Barclay Goodrow is seen as a well-liked player in the locker room, former Shark. You get Alex Winberg, a professional. Like they went out of you trade for Cody Ceci, who again, Cody Ceci, whatever, but like he's still a professional defenseman. You get Jake Wallman, like you kind of go out of your way to try to add some professional NHL players to make this look like a professional NHL team. And you get rid of David Quinn, you hire Ryan Warsofsky, who's been kind of seen as like one of the next great young coaches. And he's going to have his ups and downs as every coach does. But can this team kind of shake off the losing and while there's no expectations, start to try to build something? And I think that's the big question for the Sharks this year is nobody's projecting them to do anything. Like this is still, like, don't get me wrong, this is still going to be a bottom 5 team in the NHL. But you can't have the nights like you had last year where you lost to the Canucks 10-1. You lost to the Penguins 10-2 in back-to-back nights. You losing like 7-1 to Edmonton, 7-1 to Kraken. You can't have those nights anymore. And how does Ryan Warsofsky and this new kind of leadership group help change the culture? Just make this a professional, competent, competitive team, I think is a big burning question for this team this year.
Yeah, because from my outsider's perspective, I think I think the GM position is in good hands. It's just a matter now of filling out the other parts of the roster. And you said it perfectly in trying to just eliminate those games where you're frankly non-competitive. And look, there still is a talent disparity between where the Sharks are at right now and some of those teams that you mentioned, like the Oilers, like other teams. There still is a talent disparity, but there are still ways to be competitive in those games to where you're not getting,
shellacked.
You're not getting dragged behind the car, so to speak, by those teams. And so that's one for me. But a couple that I am interested in to keep an eye on this year is obviously all eyes are going to be on Macklin Celebrini. But as we talked about, Yaroslav Askarov.
Yep.
I am real interested to see how his season plays out because as we've talked about with this Sharks roster right now, there are 2 goalies on the roster right now at the NHL level. And then there's Askarov who factors in beyond that. And if things go like is expected for the San Jose Sharks, they're probably going to be sellers at the trade deadline. So maybe you move one of those guys. But the other part of it too is if they don't perform, Askarov's right there to step in and take starts. And I just kind of want to see how he does in those situations because we talked about it. You hit it. I think talked about it extensively. This is the opportunity for San Jose to have finally plugged a long time hole for them over these last 5, 6, however many seasons, 10, 15, 20.
Yeah, a homegrown talent at goalie. It's been almost 20 years since they've been able to draft and develop one. Yeah.
Ooh. So I'm very keen to see what he does because that was the big sticking point in moving from Nashville to San Jose is, well, I feel like my path in Nashville is blocked. And so the Sharks, I think, are hoping for the same thing is, look, go impress at the AHL level to the point that we say he's got nothing left to prove down there, and he probably doesn't already, but that's where he's going to start the season. So prove that you've got nothing to learn down at that level and grab an opportunity through inconsistent performance or injury and just never give it back.
Yeah, I think we will see Askarov, and I think there is a plan for him. McKenzie Blackwood, even last year, like he played a lot of games, and the most he's played, I think, since pre-COVID, to be honest. But he still had his nicks and bruises where, he's kind of day-to-day, might miss a week here type of thing. So I think there's still going to be opportunities for Askarov to get games in here and there. And, Vitek Vanacek is also in the mix. Well, kind of the forgotten man, it feels like, with the 3 goalies there. But like both Vanacek and Blackwood are both on the last years of their deal. So it's not like the end of the world. I think Mike Greer kind of played this really well to have 2 guys both entering. If one of them performs well, you can always re-sign him. And then you have kind of Askarov ready to slide in here at some point. So yeah, it's going to be interesting how Mike Greer continues to kind of balance we're still looking towards the future, right? We still want to kind of collect assets, but we got to make sure this roster is more competitive night in and night out. And I think they've done a better job of, one, adding more top-end talent, guys like Tyler Toffoli. Of course, you have Macklin Celebrini. Will Smith's going to be making his debut as well. But I think they did a better job of kind of putting more depth guys in there, so you're not having to rely on your AHL roster as much. And now the AHL roster should be way more competitive than we've seen. So there's no expectations. I think in San Jose right now, every fan is just jacked up, especially after Celebrini's first preseason game. And you kind of saw some of those glimpses and flashes of what makes him a special player. But yeah, I think for the Sharks, it's just like, you have to move away from what we saw last year. And yeah, 100% said it was the right thing to do. It worked out for them, but you have to start like building something so that way you're not, again, you don't want to be the next Sabres. You don't want to be the next Sens. You don't want to be that next team that's like, this is the year, guys, for like 4 years in a row. So
yeah, you don't want to be the current Anaheim where you're like, you just keep looking for, sorry to JD, our colleague. We love the Ducks, but you get what I mean. Like you You don't want to be one of those teams where you're like, are we going to see a step forward this year? Do like Chicago has done, where Chicago was anemic offensively, but at least they were
competitive.
They were competitive.
Most games, like night in, night out. That team fought hard. They played hard till the end. Like as I watched way too many Chicago games last year, like that team was they played up to their they played it beyond their talent level, and so
that's what you get for being in full tank mode all season. But another team that is hoping that a new head coach will put them in a competitive manner every night is the Seattle Kraken. The Dan Bylsma era has begun, and so we are going to discuss whether or not Seattle will mirror the team from a couple of seasons ago that made the postseason, or the team this past year that did not. So we'll discuss the burning questions for the Seattle Kraken. That is on the way as we can continue today's episode of Locked On NHL after this. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You should see my browser when it's fantasy football time. I've got like 9 different tabs open with 2 other windows watching the games, trying to make sure that I stay up to date on my fantasy team, because you never know. You might feel like Joe Burrow is going to go nuts and throw for 3 touchdowns, 300 yards like he did in last night's game against the Washington Commanders. FanDuel can help you pull in a little cash on the way as well. So just head to FanDuel.com, and best of all, you get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. It doesn't even have to be a winner. You could have put money on the New York Giants to beat the Cleveland Browns, and you still would have gotten your $200 in bonus bets. So head to FanDuel.com today to take advantage of this great deal and get your NFL season started right. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On NHL. We are once again your team every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure for your second listen, you're getting the full dose of Locked On Fantasy Hockey, so you don't miss out on any draft tidbits before your fantasy draft, which a lot of them will be happening within these next couple of weeks. Although I had one league once that drafted in fantasy football. I had one league that drafted before the preseason started.
Gross.
I'm like, that's psychotic. So
that's gross. Unless it's like a rookie league or something like that, fine.
No.
But no.
We put a stop to that because Jordy Nelson broke his leg that year. And guess who drafted Jordy Nelson in the first round?
The commissioner, I was going to say.
Yeah, me. I was like, yep, we're not doing this anymore. So Locked On Fantasy Hockey gives you all the lowdown on all the players you should target in your fantasy draft. So make sure they are your second listen today. JD, the Seattle Kraken went from Dave Hackstall to Dan Bylsma, and they're hoping that they can get back to being a playoff hopeful in the Pacific Division. Now, it's a Seattle roster that I think has plenty of grit.
Stuff.
Not a lot of scoring, though. So this will be interesting because I think we're all just waiting to see if some of these young Seattle players take steps up, if some of the big signings from the offseason, Chandler Stevenson and Brandon Montour, can provide veteran leadership. The big question, though, is it going to be enough for Seattle to get to the playoffs, or are they going to be left on the outside without a dance partner when all is said and done?
Yeah, this franchise confuses me, right? Because it's like going back to kind of when they first announced it and they had the expansion draft, right? And they were like, we're going to build this the right way. We're going slow and steady. Like, we want to kind of have a nice young core and grow with that. Then they go out and make the playoffs the second year. You wonder if they're like trying to chase that again. Because this roster is like sneaky old,
Yeah.
If you look at it, like, yes, you have Matty Beniers, who's 21, Shane Wright, who's going to be, kind of expected to be a full-time NHLer at 20, but like, looking among the forward group, Jordan Ellerby is 34, Jaden Schwartz 32, Chandler Stevenson, they just locked up for a bajillion years, is 30. On defense, like they have a few defensemen over like 30 or and over. Like this roster is kind of sneaky old, and they're kind of in that in between where their prospects aren't really ready to make that impact yet. So I don't know what to make of this roster. Like you could tell me that this is a playoff team and they like the 3rd seed in the Pacific, or you could tell me this is like the 6th seed in the Pacific. Like I feel like the high is pretty, like pretty solid. And I feel like this team could easily bottom out. Like if Shane Wright doesn't have an impact, if Matty Beniers can't get back to his rookie form, if some of these older guys just don't perform the way you expect. And the goaltending there's some questions there as well. So I honestly have no idea. This is one of the teams I'm really curious to see, especially at the beginning of the season. How quickly do they kind of come out of the gate?
Yeah, and that's going to be key for them. And I know in helping with some editing stuff for Erica, our beloved colleague at Locked On Kraken, I've had a chance to listen to Dan Bylsma's comments and just her reaction to some of the things that have been seen in Kraken training camp so far. They're really emphasizing playing with that, ferocity, tenacity, playing with pace, but also playing with a high battle level and a high compete level. They're going to need that. And so you go from, and honestly, it's interesting to me because it kind of mirrors what happened with the Minnesota Wild. You go from Dean Evison to John Hines, you go from Dave Haxtell to Dan Bylsma. You maybe don't have as much talent as some of the other teams that you're going up against do, but these two in Hines and now hopefully in Bylsma, you've got coaches that are at least going to try to play a more modern style so that you're not one of the 2 or 3 teams in the league that's just trying to slow everybody down. Like it only works so often. And so getting with and playing a modern style, I think, is going to help Seattle here. But a couple of players that I'm really keying in on as part of these burning questions. Number one is Matty Beniers, because he's now being paid as your guy, your franchise center. And so you can't afford to have him have a drop off like he did from 2 years ago to last year. He's got to take a jump up. And as far as production goes, it's kind of hard to put a value on that, depending on how many other guys produce for this Seattle team. But it definitely can't be 15 goals and 22 assists in 77 games. Like you gotta get to, between 60 and 70 points, I feel like, if you're going to be like a premier young, especially a center, especially at the center position. You got to be able to bring that from a points perspective. The other guy that I think is a real wild card is Andre Burakovsky. Like you look at what he was with Washington, he was about a 12-goal, 25-point guy per season. Goes to Colorado, has 2 20-goal seasons, has a 19-goal season as well. Now here in Seattle, 13 goals and 7 goals this past season, and they brought him in to be like a top 6 piece, middle 6 at minimum.
Yeah.
If he can provide more punch in that lineup, that's going to help deepen them and help them to go toe-to-toe against these Titans in the Pacific Division and in the Western Conference especially.
Yeah, I think that's where Shane Wright is the missing piece here, right? If Shane Wright can slide into that second line center, take some pressure off Matty Beniers, so teams have to kind of they can't just load up their best defensive lineup and just focus on Matty Beniers and what he's doing. If Shane Wright, I think he's the key. If he comes out and he has that rookie season where maybe not a Calder final, but if he's at least in the conversation, potential 50-60 point season from Wright, I think that would go a long way in this team being a potential playoff team. But if he struggles and they still have questions about it, kind of down the middle, then you could see this team kind of flatlining. But Shane Wright was a monster last year. He played for Bylsma with the Coachella. That team, that Coachella Valley went to the finals 2 years in a row. I think he knows the coaching staff. I think they know how to utilize him. And I expect Shane Wright to have a good season. And I think really maybe help solidify their issues. Because then if he's playing your 2C, you could probably, kind of move maybe like a guy like Yanni Gourde playing as your 3C. Like you can it gives you some flexibility with what you want to do down the middle. And then you can maybe take advantage of other teams, their third line. Because that's it. If your second and third line are just better than other teams, like second and third line, it goes a long way, especially in the regular season where you don't have as much time to kind of maybe plan and to try to defend them as much. So I think Shane Wright is kind of the key for them. And maybe the other guy I just want to mention too is Philip Grubauer. I think he is I know he's got a couple years left on his deal, but since he's gotten to Seattle, his save percentage has been below 900 all 3 seasons. They paid him to be a premier goalie, and he has not been that. So is this the year, if he doesn't do well, do they try to pull the plug on the Grubauer and maybe go with Joey Decord or whoever? But I think Shane Wright and Philip Grubauer are the 2 guys for this team that they're going to make or break this team.
Yeah, and I think the Grubauer discussion is more earnest too, because you do have Joey Decord who stepped in and had a pretty darn good year when they were fighting up at the top of the standings. They kind of bottomed out, especially with him showing the ability to maybe step in. I think that puts way more onus on Grubauer to try to clean himself up. The crazy part too is Seattle had the season that they did with their goalies collectively having a 2.83 goals against average and a 909 save percentage. You would take those numbers a lot of times
for a save percentage over 9 in San Jose.
And they still they were near the bottom of the standings just because they couldn't score. And so if some guys step up and are able to provide a consistent scoring touch, and you nailed it, Shane Wright. If you can go Matty Beniers, Shane Wright, Yanni Gourde, and Chandler Stevenson as your centers, that's pretty good. And Wright doesn't need to win the Calder. If he's in the conversation, that means he's having a good season. So we'll see. But the final team that we will discuss, not necessarily
favorite teams, huh?
Not issues offensively, so to speak. The issues are on the other side of the puck. And so we will tackle the St. Louis Blues as we continue today's episode of Locked On NHL after this. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by Indeed. We are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now to support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
And if you like fantasy, you need to check out Prize Picks, because Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. All you have to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Right now in all September, 1 Caleb Williams passing yard. Seth, do you think you could throw for 1 passing yard in the NFL?
No, I couldn't.
No.
But Caleb,
I could
you
not
know
either.
who can? Caleb
Williams can. Yes. Passing yard. You get 1 win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right. Only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free dubs. Don't miss this deal on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. Also, if you're like me and I live in California, Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNHL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game.
Home stretch of today's episode of Locked On NHL. And once again, we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. All right, it's St. Louis Blues time. And it's pretty simple for me. Jordan Binnington's good. Joel Hofer's a capable backup. Offense not bad for St. Louis. They've got some good pieces there.
Yep.
I don't know what to make of this decor. I can't wrap my head around it. I don't know. Like, what's going to happen with this St. Louis Blues defense? Is it going to hold up?
It's old. It's old.
Yeah, it's so something.
Torrey Krug, right? Done for the year.
Yep.
2 years left on his deal. I wonder if he's a LTIR. We never see him again. Maybe. We'll see. But anyway, Justin Falk signed for 3 more years, 32 years old. Colin Parayko, 31, signed for 4 more seasons at 6.5. Nick Leddy signed for 2 years at $4 million. Ryan Suter, who's I think was when his original jersey was black and white.
And here I was going to try to do a riff on Liar Liar and say Suter's old.
Like, this team is thank you. This team they're expecting a lot of older guys to kind of carry the load, and it's a weird team because, like, if you look at their forward group, like, most of their forwards are kind of hitting their prime right now, like kind of early to mid 20s. I know they got a couple older veterans here, but like it feels like they're doing a successful job of trying to navigate the retool, especially among the forwards. Binnington, like you said, had a bounce back season last year, and I know he's not our favorite goalie personally, but like, we know that the guy can stop the puck when he's not throwing a tantrum. Or maybe he does both at the same time, probably both. But the defense, though, it looks old, it looks creaky. You wonder too, like, if teams are just going to be like, you know what, let's just throw as much speed as we possibly can at this defense and see if they can keep up. We know they like to play a heavy game and try to kind of wear teams down that way. But like, I'm worried about this defense just kind of the falling apart and just the floor falling out below them. So
yeah, it's because you're going to ask a lot of Jordan Binnington to be able to hold up over a full season of just getting peppered by shots. And if we've seen one thing in the NHL over the last few seasons, speed and scoring are continuing to be more and more of a priority for every team. And so it's just wave after wave, and you go up against these teams like Dallas or, Nashville and Colorado from a like top end perspective, Dallas from being able to hit you with three different lines that can score.
I mean, Colorado's speed, right? I mean, Nate
Yeah.
McKinnon is just like a freaking monster. Like, he's got like he's like every time they're like tracking him, it's just like, oh yeah, he's casually doing 23, 24 miles an hour on the ice and just these bursts. Cale
Edmonton
McCarr's,
too.
yeah, it's I worry about the speed. Maybe their forwards are just going to have to kind of chip in, and that's what made them good before, was their forwards would be willing to kind of play. But like none of their forwards kind of scream that like defensive, kind of Ryan O'Reilly type of forward who's willing to play that dirty game. But who knows?
Time will tell very, very soon. Beyond that, on the Blues front, I am interested to see how the offer sheets factor into this, because you talk about young defensemen, and you could Philip Broberg, he's 23, he's not he's maybe a little on the high paid side, but he still is 23, and so he could be a huge boost to that D-core. And then Dylan Holloway too. He was expected to be a huge part of Edmonton's plans, and now he is part of the mix in St. Louis. But it feels like a large part of this all starts and finishes with Jordan Binnington, and if he's able to keep his emotions in check, if he starts to get like Jack Nicholson in anger management, then you might have some problems.
If Binnington's like a top 10 goalie again this year, like they're probably going to be fighting for a playoff spot. You know what also would help if for their playoff spots, don't get swept by the Sharks this season. So yes.
Did that really happen?
The Sharks won 19 games last year. 3 of them were to the Blues.
Oh, ick.
And the Blues missed the playoffs by like less than, I think they missed the playoffs by a couple of points.
Well, there's 6 right there.
There's 6 right there. So
Jeez,
don't get swept by the San Jose Sharks. But yeah, I think that's, if the forward group, like I feel confident in the forward group. I think they're going to be a fun group. I think they're going to provide a lot of scoring. Maybe the Blues are just like, we need Binnington to stand on his head, and we're just going to try to win games like 4-3 or 5-4, and like Binnington just needs to make crucial saves. But I don't know. Yeah, or who knows? I mean, yeah. I don't know. Do the Blues make the playoffs?
No,
No,
I don't think so. I think they are.
I know we're doing our playoff teams in a couple episodes, but yeah, it's
never a bad time to start. I don't think they make the postseason. I think they are one of the teams that is on the way out. I would put it, and I don't know, call me crazy, but I'd probably put them closer to Utah than I would to Minnesota in the standings.
Your bias.
Well, that's probably part of it, but we'll find out. I still have to wrap my head around that, because I don't know if that could be subject to change too. Time will tell. Time will tell with all of this, and so
maybe.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe.
I feel like some of these burning questions are pretty solidly like
we got them perfectly right, Seth. So no need to just fast forward the season until the draft, so the Sharks can have another top awesome pick. So
and the Minnesota Wild will be hoisting the Stanley Cup.
Oh, you got NHL 25 already?
What? Yeah. I saw on Twitter that NHL 25 has no trade and no move clauses in the game now, and I was like, great. Just another reminder about Parisi and Suter. Thanks a lot.
All right, let's get out.
Oh well. All right. That's going to do it for today's show. Before I derail any further, thank you to everybody for tuning in each and every day of the week. Make sure you hit that like button and hit the subscription button as well, so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week, because we've got you covered every Monday through Friday with our full array of Locked On NHL hosts. keeping you up to date on all things NHL as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.